The Prime Minister is Ian Samuel from Pueblo, Colorado. He's a junior computer science major with minors in communication arts and political science. The member of government is Marie Tenney. She is from Columbia, Missouri, a junior psychology and communications double major with a science and policy sciences minor. Representing the opposition is the Colorado College. The leader of the opposition is Ian O'Brien Farron O'Connell. He's a senior from Westminster, Colorado, majoring in... And I call upon the Prime Minister, Ian Samuel, to deliver the first constructive speech of a duration of 7 minutes.
Before I start, I just want to take some time to offer a few thanks to everyone who's made this tournament such a valuable experience for both Marie and I. The first person I'd like to thank is Heinz Well, who's the Division Head of Language and Literature at Truman State University, as well as the Vice President, Gary Gordon, as well as the President of Truman State, Barbara Dixon. Certainly, without their support, this program wouldn't exist, and certainly we could never have had the success we've had. So thank you. I also want to extend thanks to my family, particularly my father, who just lost his brother just earlier this week. My family, of course, is more integral than any other single people in who I am, and if I am good at anything or a good person at all, it's thanks to them. Also, my thanks to my team, especially our coaches, Kevin and Jess, as well as our honorary sort of prodigal coaches, Rob Lane and Jacob Stitzman. Certainly, we couldn't ask for anyone better to advise us and to guide us to the tournament. They have provided us with everything we could ask for and very much more. They do the work of hundreds of people, so thank you all, and especially to our teammates too, who won my heart. And the last thing to our offer is simply the many friends and many people who made it possible for me to enjoy this tournament and all the rounds we've been in so far. Thanks to my friends from William Jewell, especially Phil and Luke, who know how much I love them. Yeah. Friends too, yeah, they know. So, but thanks to all the friends I've made all throughout the community. There are simply too many that we can name, especially, of course, thanks to Net Benefits, who I promised Jed I would mention. I guess it's a website or something. So check that out. Of course, also, thanks to the adjudicating panel, our friends from Colorado College, and my partner, Marie Tenney, whose stewardship of this team will become evident in about 15 minutes. If everyone's ready, I'm ready to begin. With the resolution that it takes an international community to raise a state. The first thing Marie and I are going to do is provide some definitions to clarify our advocacy. The A part of this is it takes simply means that there is a need, that we should show you that there is some policy that can be implemented to give you an international community to raise a state. The B part of this is an international community is simply best understood as a group of nations working together. Right now, as we'll talk about in case, the U.S. is preventing the formulation of such a community, and Marie and I will take action to stop that. The C part of this is raise simply means to improve and help to grow. When we talk about raising a nation, we mean, of course, not literally raising it from infancy so that it grows bigger and eventually swallows the globe, but rather, we mean about raising and improving it and helping the conditions of the people there. The D part of this is a state in particular. We're going to talk about the nation of Iran. Marie and I have a particular concern with the way U.S. policy is being conducted for this nation, and so that's what we're going to talk about. The E part of this is the standard we think you should evaluate all the definitions from. We think this provides for debatability as well as for fairness, and our interpretation is totally fair to our friends from the Colorado College. The criteria we ask you with roundly is simply net benefit. We're going to propose a policy, and if it does more good than harm, then you should vote for it. And if it does more harm than good, then you should vote for it. Observation 2. Some background on the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act of 1996. The A part of this is that the ILSA was passed in 1996 in response to a scandal, sort of, involving the Conoco Corporation. They essentially wanted to invest in Iran's oil fields so they could develop the oil field there. President Clinton at the time was very worried about causes of, guess what, international terrorism, just like now because of the Oklahoma City bombing. And so ILSA was passed in response. And I'll take it away.
Thank you. Going back to some of the definitions we provided. When we raise a child, we actually know when the child is raised. How do I know when a nation has been raised to be a fitted to our job?
When the people of Iran are free and they can dissent and the women and children can walk around freely, I think that's pretty damn mature. The B point of this is that the ILSA threatens third-party sanctions. This is why it's unique from a lot of our other sanctions legislation. It doesn't just say we won't trade with Iran, but it also threatens to sanction any other nations that trade with Iran as well. As a result, many small countries that can't afford to defy the United States end up not trading with Iran at all. This is what's preventing the formation of an international community to help raise this stake. So, that said, let's move to the plan advocacy so we can begin to define our advantages. The plan text we would give you is the United States federal government should repeal all economic sanctions on the nation of Iran, so we don't need. That would include repealing the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act of 1996. If there aren't any questions, we'll begin with Advantage 1. But before we get there.
You specifically say economic sanctions, so any other sanctions we have in place specifically on dual-use antibiotics will still be in place?
We don't take any particular stance. First of all, I don't think we have dual-use antibiotic sanctions on Iran. Moreover, the economic sanctions we talk about include things like trading antibiotics, yes, but if you're asking whether or not we're going to solve them, B2s, the answer is probably no. Advantage 1 is political reform within Iran. The eighth part of this is that sanctions impede upon political reform within the nation of Iran. The way they do this is through a couple of reasons. First, there's an increase in popular sentiment against the United States and the West because the people see, quite rightly, that the United States appears to be biased against them. It doesn't want anyone to trade with them. It thinks they should be isolated from the rest of the universe, and so as a result, they develop negative feelings toward the United States and the Western nations. But the second reason that it needs on reform is it allows the hardline elements of Iran's government to keep a foothold. Because essentially what happens is the hardliners point to the United States and the nations that are obeying the ILSA and say, see what these nations are doing to you. See what the West wants you to live like. And the people say, well, you've got kind of a good point. The B point of this is that, however, the Iranian people, contrary to many stereotypes I'm sure you've heard, are fundamentally very moderate. You give you a couple of pieces of evidence for this. First, they've twice elected Mohammad Khatami to be their president. He won his last election in a landslide, and he's campaigned as a reformer, trying to bring political change to the nation of Iran. But second, Khatami has done things like allowed the IAEA into Iran to investigate their nuclear program, which demonstrates that the Iranian people are pretty moderate. The reason the hardliners keep hanging around is simply because they've got that anti-US platform, that foothold that Khatami just can't get rid of. The C point of this is that removal of these sanctions would remove this barrier to reform, which would lead then to the D point, the terminal impacts of why we want political reform in Iran. The first reason is that it helps the women and children in that nation first. We've seen that under legalization. Many of the women and the students and the children of Iran would dearly love it if their leader, Mohammad Khatami, would stop having to defend the United States sanction policy. We give you an option where we wouldn't have to. Second, though, we would argue you have a critical obligation simply as critics and as people to support reform that can free people from the chains of hardline governments that really they'd rather live without. Advantage 2 is economic development. The A point of this is that the ILSA is pushing the United States out of Iran, and as a result, the United States can't get any of the lucrative oil contracts that would result in there. The Conoco contract in 1996 is a perfect example of this. Well, the B point of this is that this ends up hurting United States oil businesses and driving up prices. And I can hear the terms in your head right now. Well, that's good. I hate oil executives. Jerks. But, unfortunately, it's not quite that simple. Because the C point of this is that the plan increases fair competition and opens up trade with the United States, and the people that helps most directly and immediately are the bottom-rung employees of these companies. Because I'll tell you the truth, oil executives aren't going to starve no matter what happens. But if Exxon or Conoco can't get oil contracts in Iran, and they let go some of their bottom-rung employees, who then starve and don't have employment. The D point of this is, no thank you, the terminal impact of this position. First, it helps those bottom-rung employees first. It helps the poor get jobs because the job creation is the result from going in and investing. But second, we argue that it's ethical to take actions that help the most needy first, that we should always act in ways that help people who are the most disadvantaged. And that's exactly what the plan does for you, which is a reason offensively you should vote for it. Advantage 3. These are rock reconstruction. The A point of this is that U.S. coalition efforts are stalled right now. I'm sure about a year ago you remember hearing that reconstruction was going to be done in a day and a half, and there was going to be no problem with this whatsoever. The reality has been somewhat different. We've seen the Red Cross pull out of that nation. We've seen Spain and Japan starting to get jittery and not really sure of their position because of international pressures on them. We've seen that U.S. coalition efforts are stalled right now because we can't get much international support. The B point of this, though, is that the reason is because the U.S. offends these allies because of our third-party sanctions. Essentially, we say, you shouldn't trade with this country. We can tell you what to do. We should be able to boss you around and tell you who you should trade with and who you shouldn't. Thus, when these countries consider helping the United States in Middle East policy, they always remember the thorn of the ILSA, where we try to boss them around and more likely to resist on other matters. The C point of this is that the repeal of the ILSA would thus increase our Middle East capital with our allies. It's a classic horse trading scenario. We do something for them, and then we can say, will you please help us with reconstruction and do something for us? The deep one is the terminal implications. We say it gets water and infrastructure to the citizens and decreases political violence if we have international reconstruction efforts. Marie and I think that sanctions on Iran are badly misguided and grounded largely in stereotypes. For these reasons, we propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And now turn to the Leader of the Opposition, Ian O'Connell, for a constructive speech of 8 minutes.
First, before I begin, I have a couple thank yous that I'd like to reiterate to this community. The first, of course, is going to be thank you to you, the organization, for providing us this opportunity to debate this topic in front of you, and providing us a forum to engage in intellectual activities such as this that I believe is fundamental to our education. Additionally, I would like to thank Dr. Upside and all of our students that helped us put this tournament on and gave us such an amazing location to see something. I would also like to thank the Tavern staff for actually running a national tournament that has been on time. Now, who's to blame in the past? Let's not go there, but let's just say, let's be thankful that we're going to be getting out of here in time to eat. Additionally, I would also like to thank the administration at the Colorado College, in particular, President Richard Celeste, who has come to us and has made debate one of the pioneer programs. And if any of you need help, we are, of course, an open institution to talk to your administrators as well. Additionally, I'd like to thank the Dean of Students, Dr. Mike Edmonds, for all his help in the past few days, for really helping us calm our nerves and get involved in activities as focused as we can be. I would also like to thank my team. Without the team members that I have supporting me throughout this endeavor for this year, I simply would not be here. In particular, my biggest thank you that I could ever think of making in front of this community or any other is to Ms. Caitlin Ross, who has been somebody who has supported me through a very trying time and has made me want to succeed further. So thank you, Caitlin. Just a couple more. I'm sorry. I'm a senior, so I have to make all the things I can. Of course, I would like to thank the coaching staff, and by coaching staff, I mean my former partner, Kyle Beard, who has been so integral in my education as a debater. His former partner, Christopher Flanch, who was so integral in him becoming a good debater, and of course, Andrew Boyd, who was Chris's mentor. So we have a good system. Additionally, I have to thank Mark Skorowski for all of the knowledge, leadership, intellect. Just an amazing person. Please come talk to him. I know that there was a discussion on that benefits you mentioned it about who he is. So please take an opportunity to find out. Additionally, I'd like to thank, and this is probably the biggest thank you that I'm going to give, my mentor, my leader, my family, away from my family, Bonnie Stapleton, somebody who has led me, taught me, and provided me support when I needed it most. Thank you, Bonnie. I'd also like to thank my family, not only for giving me 4 very Irish names, but also for giving me a great home environment to grow up in, and a reliance on education as a fundamental tool in who I would be as a person. Finally, I would like to thank God. I know this is a little weird in this forum where we have so many different people of beliefs, but I believe in God, and I would like to thank you for this opportunity to work with her. The first thing that I want to point out, which is just kind of an overview, is that we as the opposition team are going to be advocating what would occur absent the resolution, absent passing this resolution. Ultimately, that means we're not going to ask the international community to get involved in building a nation state. Secondly, that means the nations would be free from the exploitative domination and would empower themselves and rebuild themselves without interference. That's an overview. Now let's get into the opposition philosophy. That an international community denies fundamentally the creation of a nation state. The first point of this is going to be the conditions of development to create a nation state. The first is self-determination. As Will Klimko would tell us, multicultural citizenship, one of the only ways to become a nation state is if you preserve your self-governance, and you force yourself to become that self-actualized state. And then whenever an international community becomes involved, you lose your identity. In essence, you fracture who you are as a culture away from what you can develop as a nation. At that level, you can never build a nation state because you're always going to be reliant on some other body performing your being. None of this is not you. The second condition is a knowledge of self-sufficiency. Ultimately, there's a difference between relying on any other power for your soul state as a nation than being on your own and being able to run yourself as a peoples. The subpoint being of this is that the international community will always leave a cultural fingerprint. We see this with language ties, we see this with diplomatic ties, and we see this most explicitly in Africa, and of course right now we're seeing it in the Middle East, that anytime an international community is involved in any sort of nation building, they leave a cultural fingerprint. The subpoint seen of this is that the community is horrible at turning over power. First of all, as far as big issues like security are concerned, our international community has not done a good job providing security benefits to other nations once they lose that international reliance. Second thing I'll get to in a moment here is that they don't take political actions except for personal interest. They only get involved in states if they believe there is a benefit towards themselves. Additionally, when we look at this specifically, we see that at best case scenario, they're going to leave a mess in a state like Afghanistan, and the worst case scenario is that they'll try to control oil fields. Realize that they try to tell you that if we lift our sanctions on Iran, all these nations will go in and be friendly towards the oil fields. Realize that that's simply not true. We're going to see exploitation on a massive level from Russia and France, especially with the French control of the oil fields. That's the United States is not doing at all. Finally, and I'm going to get to the moment, the biggest point of this is that neo-colonialization occurs. That essentially what we have is ourselves colonializing any other nation as a community and not calling it anti-imperialism. Your question?
Yeah, so your argument then is that to prevent Iran from doing something really dumb, we should sanction them to protect them from themselves, or who exactly?
I'm saying we should stay out of Iran's business. The best course of action is for the international community to stop trying to develop a state and allow Iran, as you say, since there are so many moderates, to self-determine and furthermore become self-sufficient. If you want a really great example of where the international community has done a horrible job, look no further than Haiti, and look at the fact that every time we try to help a government self-actualize, when we try to remove ourselves and bring other community members in, we only make the situation worse. We only lead to more violence and more dehumanization. The subpoint D then becomes that the international community prevents any sort of raising of a nation. In this case, this specifically ties to Iran, the fact that we cannot build a nation by allowing the community to exploit them, but it also ties to any other nation-state project that we might undertake. None of this time. We go to the second off-page position, which is going to be a tough advantage. That this mindset fuels northern exploitation of southern countries. Now, there are a couple types of exploitation. The first is overt exploitation. We've seen this in Iraq, where right now, currently, we use no bid contracts from the United States, and then we take all of their oil and control their oil fields. Furthermore, we deny them the ability to build infrastructure around these oil fields that will help them become self-sufficient should we ever leave that country. Additionally, with political power, we invest ourselves so much into the governing council of Iraq that we will never allow them to control it through themselves. We never give them the ability to self-actualize. And additionally, look at the rhetoric that we use now by bringing in the multinational communities. We're simply doing this to hide the effect that we have within this country so that we continue the exploitation of Iraq, which began with the invasion by the Bush administration. Not this time. Secondly, we see this in the past with imperialist ties, specifically in the Philippines and India, where nations blatantly use resource raping so that they can control other nations, and they use them for exploitative means rather than allowing them to build a nation state. The subpoint B is that there are also, of course, indirect instances of exploitation. Look at the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and specifically the fact that they were anti-Soviet rebels that the multinational community with leadership from the United States got involved with. Look at what happened. Not only did we destroy a nation twice over, we created more terrorism through the form of Al-Qaeda, and we created more repression through the form of the Taliban. We are going to see this instance over and over again until we learn our lesson that the international community does not have the ability to raise a nation state without using exploitation. Your question?
Didn't we have sanctions on the Taliban and stuff getting really, really bad? We weren't trading with them.
But I fail to see how that made the situation better, right? We should have removed ourselves as an international community and allowed them to self-identify and allow them to set up a government with a progressive movement, like you say, as occurring in Iran. Furthermore, we have the examples in Africa, specifically with Sierra Leone and Liberia, where we have countries that aren't able to control their governments and that additionally are calling them a multinational community because they realize that they don't have the ability to be self-sufficient or to self-determine. The subpoint C into this is that this prevents a nation from being raised. The subpoint D is that this exploitation is going to be wrong. First of all, it leads to violence. We've seen this in the instances of the examples I gave above. Second of all, it prevents the ability for ever being formed within these states. Third of all, it leads to more human rights abuses, specifically when we look at the Taliban or when we look at the abuses within Sierra Leone or Liberia or Pakistan. Fourthly, this precludes any sort of active solution that the nation can take upon itself to build up a nation. Now let's go into the case. The first advantage that they give you is that this is going to lead to political reform. And this first point is that the United States right now is impeding the bias they want to isolate. That this allows hardliners to keep hold, and Iranians are going to be realize that this only feeds our analysis. I'm going to turn this by saying that when the multinational community, in essence, the United States right now embodied in this community, they got themselves involved in Iran. We only gave fuel to hardliners. And then in addition, when we use our biases to try to isolate Iran, we only allow the human rights abuses to continue, and we prevent a progressive movement from actually identifying themselves as a nation state and raising up. This only fuels the argumentation that the opposition is actually what we should uphold in today's resolution. Let's get into the implication of going through this. He says that this will help women and children, and will provide us the critical obligation to support that we as a community have to support. Realize the best support that we can provide to Iran is to say that we as an international body will no longer exploit them for their oil reserves or for the benefits that they might provide, and allow them to self-determine as a state, and allow the moderates to get rid of the Grand Council. And then in addition, when they develop that nation-state identity, they'll be able to be self-sufficient in the future. The second advantage that he gives you deals with economics. Realize that I'm going to group this and turn this and tell you that we're only going to lead to more oppression as far as economic system is concerned within Iran, because it doesn't tell you how we're going to control other nations like Russia and France that I gave above from coming in and exploiting those oil fields as well. If anything, we're only going to continue to mask the problem and never allow them to set up an economy that will be self-sustaining for their own good. Furthermore, I would say that if we go ahead and do this, we're only going to legitimize the actions that the Iranian extremists have taken because we're allowing multinationals to exploit. As far as Iraq is concerned, realize that this only fuels our argumentation that as far as the reconstruction is concerned, when a multinational community gets involved, they destroy a nation, they don't want to set it up. Additionally, this will only lead to more detriment within Iraq. Thank you.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition. And now warmly turn to the Member of the Government, Marie Tenney, for a constructive speech of 8 minutes.
He just reminded me the thank yous are first. You can tell I'm pretty excited to get in the debate. But I'm going to go to the thank yous first, though. I do think that we need to extend another thanks to our coaches, specifically Kevin. He's given up an amazing amount of time to help our team. He's our only debate coach that does primarily debate, also our administrator, also our DOF, does everything, coaches, teaches classes too. So I think he's really been amazing. And I also like to send a thank you to Jess as well. Sorry about that. I also like to extend a thank you to Jess. She's our student helper, she's a graduate assistant, and she's really been very excited and always had her energy has really helped keep our energy up as well, so we really appreciate that. I also like to thank my past coaches, also had a giant influence on me. My high school coach, Mr. A. He taught me how to debate, critiques, and counterpoints while judges in Missouri were still voting on inherent barriers. So he definitely got me involved at an early level. And I also like to thank my first coach, Langdon. He definitely taught me my sarcasm and ferocity. He never thought I ever won a single debate round. He would never tell me that he was excited about me. But I always knew he was, and it was the fact that he was so harsh that really made me harsh on myself. I think helped me grow. And last, I would also like to thank my parents. They've always eagerly supported me. They bought me my first briefcase when I thought it was cool. And they also actively, got involved and watched me highlight reviews. So my dad's like, I swear I want to be your law assistant someday. So my family's really appreciative of me. All right, I'm going to go ahead and go right into the case argumentation now. The first thing I want off the top is they grant us the net beneficiality criterion. When they do that, none of the arguments they make are weighed through this. At best, they apply some terms on case. But these two off-case positions don't weigh into the round. I would say on that level, they wouldn't warrant a ballot. So let's look right into the argumentation. First, they tell us that self-determination, without the resolution, we can encourage self-determination, and the international community denies its ability to have self-determination. My first response is it's not unique to us. We're in no way denying the ability to have self-determination or creating this. My next, though, is that this doesn't weigh through net beneficiality, that we don't have any impacts here. Like Truman says, we don't get to make our own choices. But this doesn't hurt any individual humans or anything that it specifically impacts us out to. But my next response, though, is a turn, because sanctions hurt self-determination. That when these individual nations want to get trade relationships, that Iran wants to get these trade relationships with Americans, with the rest of the world, we deny them the ability to make those choices. On that level, we would tell you the case is absolutely indictment of a statement where agreeing this would be problematic. My next response is that is another term that denying the ability to make these choices is more exploitative and more destroying their self-determination. That when we stand up and say, well, they don't have a right to make these choices, we won't allow them to trade with us if they do, and I tell you that would be more exploitative and worse. My next response, though, is another term, is that it's worse because they assume that Iran can't look after their own interests, that they wouldn't get involved in oil exchange programs, for example, if it didn't benefit them. I would say this is a worse mindset and is more problematic when we assume that they can't make their own choices and that they don't have the ability to make these correct ones. My next response, though, is another term that basically decreasing sanctions increases the quality of life within Iran because they're able to have more flow of income, and this makes them able to be more self-determination. That when nations unfortunately have money that makes them more influential on the global scale, I would say this would be more helpful for Iran to move into the future. My last response here, before I get more specific to his argumentation, is that Iran is very experienced with oil. They've been selling oil at least for the past decade, and so I tell you on this level that they have the ability to make these choices that are educated, and we're not just forcing them to do anything. All right, now specifically he tells us that they're losing their identity and they don't have self-determination, and we always leave a cultural fingerprint. I would say on this level, we're not encouraging any cultural fingerprints because we're not trying to influence the way their government works at all. In fact, we're saying that we're not trying to change that through our sanctions. We're just noting that our policy is stopping them from changing their government on their own. Then they say that the community is so horrible at turning over power. Well, okay, we have nothing to do with turning over power. That's not any part of our plan or any part of our argumentation. The last thing he says, he gives the example of Haiti. He says, look, we're trying to make a government there, and that really hasn't worked. We would agree that that's a bad scenario, but we're not trying to help the government in Iran. We're not trying to manipulate the government. We're just trying to get rid of the barriers that stop them from making their own changes in their own government. Sure.
How's the international community involved?
Because the international community will be getting involved through trade. We give this examples on cases, third-party sanctions that they can now take. Okay, the next disadvantage he gives us is it fuels this mindset of exploitation. My first response is, this is exactly the same as the first position. I don't know if I'm missing something, but I think you can cross-apply all my answers here because the point is that we're exploiting them and taking away the ability to make choices. But then he says, see Iraq, to their contracts in the oil fields, those are so exploitative. But actually they're not. They didn't get the best case scenario they could get, but there's still contracts in which we negotiated with them, and they chose what they felt was the proper price, and we were on the other side of that, not at this time. Then he says, look at the governing council in Iraq. We're still controlling there. Sure, this doesn't engage the case at all. We're not trying to control the Iranian government at all. We just tell you this is something preventing it from reforming on its own. Then he says that there's indirect instances of exploitation, that we should have, for example, left alone the Taliban, and that was problematic. It seems like he's really contradicting himself here because we did leave the Taliban alone. We had sanctions on them, we weren't engaging them, and then look what happened after that. We would tell you on that level that sanctions are problematic, that it's better to engage nations diplomatically instead of just denying the fact they have a right to get in their own economic choices if they choose to. Finally, on the impact scenario, well, first he says we're preventing them from being raised, and this is somehow problematic. This is just entirely generic. It doesn't apply to our position at all because when he doesn't answer the real analysis on advantage one, I was saying we aren't preventing them from being raised. That getting rid of this last foothold is an important way to let them raise themselves. Now finally, let's move to the impact scenario. Basically, he just says, leads to violence, human rights abuse, preclude solution. There's no analysis on any of this. I don't understand why it's going to lead to more violence. If anything, it's not unique because it already exists now. But there's no way the affirmative advocacy in this round is going to make anything worse in that region. I think as we give you impetus to make it better. Sure.
This actually goes back up to your Iraq analysis. Are you asking us to believe that when the United States unilaterally awarded the caliber and the rights of oil fields in Iraq, that somehow the Iraqis were involved in that decision?
Yes, absolutely. I think that it's their oil. They could have denied getting these contracts. More importantly, even if you're right, and it sounds like people in here think she is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't influence our case at all because we're not forcing them to get contracts. Alright, well let's go to the case debate. Because I think the fact that they drop the fact that they don't ever argue T, so they like the way that we've set up this round. They don't argue net benefits, so they like that as well. So they have to win on offensive ground. They don't give you any of that. On advantage one, it says this speeds our analysis because getting involved fuels hardliners and that's somehow going to make them matter. Absolutely not. The point is the fact that we're denying them the ability to get in trade is what's fueling the hardliners. That the hardliners can point to the United States and say, see this poverty that you have right now, that's the U.S.'s fault. They're the ones doing it. We feel like that allows them to shift the blame and keep their support in the government. So absolutely return this. Second, he says, isolating Iran has caused their lack of reform. Okay, grant. That's the case argument. The fact that we've isolated them and haven't allowed to engage them is what has kept them in power and keeping this going on. So I think that they don't engage this internal scenario here when we tell you that Iranian people are moderate, they want to move forward, but the sanctions are the last barriers to reform, and we give you that alternative. Now in the impact scenario, he says the best solution is just to ignore them. I would tell you it's not. If we give you, and we have given you this round of action you can take to help the women and children first, this critical obligation you have to support reform, we tell you to absolutely want to vote for that. And ignoring a problem does not make the problem go away, especially when you're the one causing the problem. Now let's go to advantage to the economic development. He says, turn, more oppression, because we can't stop other nations from entering. But I think I answered this already on the top. Basically, I think the most important argument from that was that they have the choice to do this. Iran can deny them to come in. It's not like dropping sanctions mean you have to trade with us. It just means if you choose to engage the opportunity, you can. Then he says this legitimizes the actions of the government, and this is something, it's kind of this turn that now we're going to support the government now. But I would tell you that's not the scenario we give you, because we tell you the only reason why now is the time to drop sanctions is because Khatami is making all these actions. Basically, Khatami is saying, I want to work with the United States, I want to lead to these reforms, but I need you to reach out your hand as well and engage me on that level. So I tell you this completely delegitimize the hardliners, because their one block that they can debate around and rally around is now gone. Now it's increased the power for Khatami and the reformers. But all of these arguments don't engage this position at all. When we tell you this helps the economy of the United States because it can be more fair and competitive, but it helps those on the bottom first. And you have an obligation to help those that are the most disadvantaged. Now lastly on the rock scenario, all he says is that we're now going to destroy a nation. Well, I want to know what the alternative is. Does he think that we should pull out Iraq? If I could go back in time, I would also take back the Iraqi war, but I can't. But what I can do is say that now it's our responsibility to reconstruct that area, and we can't do it alone. That we need the rest of the world to engage, to create, as we're telling you, the impacts, increase the infrastructure, increase the water, so people's quality of lives will be increased. So on that level, when they grant the fact that we get Middle East capital, which encourages more reform, you would want to vote on that because of the moral implications we give you.
Wow. Thank you, NPDA. I mean, that's the most obvious person or organization to make that. Obviously, also, thank you, Dr. Tada, and all of the students who have allowed CSUN to be this amazing host for us. I'd like to extend thanks to, a million people, but this is the Oscars, so I'm not going to try. Thank you for opposition, and thank you for Colorado for producing 3 of the 4 debaters you see up here today. I think that's great. I'd like to thank Ian especially. My only regret is that we've only had 3 tournaments and will only ever have 3 tournaments together. I think I wish he wouldn't graduate, but I guess he has to. I'd like to thank Colorado College, especially the administration and President Dick Celeste, as well as Al Johnson for creating the program at Colorado College. Obviously, Connie Stapleton, I don't think anybody needs to question why we would thank Connie Stapleton for being such an amazing coach and such an amazing person. As far as going to thanking my family, I'd like to thank my 12-year-old brother who woke up early on a Saturday morning to wish me luck this morning.
Oh.
Yeah, that's really sweet, actually. And I would actually like to echo Ian's sentiment that I'm not particularly religious, but I would like to thank the God I do believe in, God or goddess, upper deity, and continue with this. Let's go ahead and get to the debate. I will go in the same order as everyone else. As soon as everybody's behaved for this. Realize that the first argument given to you is that we buy into the net benefits criteria, so our arguments are therefore not offensive. However, she fails to acknowledge that surely we can weigh the ultimate implications of the disadvantages and the critique that or the philosophy we provide. At the point that we can show you that we cause more violence through our actions, you're never going to see that that doesn't weigh into net benefits. Obviously, if people die, that's a disadvantage, and that comes at the bottom of both of these positions. Okay. Now just a quick overview on all the terms you provide about sanctions. Both teams are advocating the removal of sanctions. The difference is the opposition is advocating the removal of sanctions and the absence of the international community and exploitation that the international community provides. However, the government is advocating the removal of sanctions and the continued exploitation, most specifically with Conoco, the 1996 contract that they talked about. At that point, they don't win those terms about the sanctions, and it becomes a moot point. Sure.
Where was this counterplan text in the LOC?
Well, at the point that we're saying we're looking at a world without those international community interventions, at the point we're talking about stepping away from Iran and the rest of the implications in that, that's where that advocacy comes from. That's our entire philosophy. Okay. Continuing on. So after these terms about the sanctions, which obviously don't apply, let's go ahead and get to this. Iran is experiencing oil and therefore will not be subject to this. However, at the point that the government's advocacy is going ahead and engaging Iran and holding them to a Conoco contract in 1996, engaging them through France and Russia, you're going to see that exploitation. At that point, we are using them solely for their oil resources, not at this time. Second of all, her next turn is that we're not trying to change the government in Iran. However, that fails to address the real point of this position. At the point that we do go into other countries, at the point that we do try to force our will and exploit other countries, we do this in other cases. We have seen this in Haiti. We have seen this time and time again. At the point that they are advocating the resolution, they're also advocating what actually happens in the real world. I'm going to say that that's getting really loud. I'm going to say that's always going to be exploitation, and the implications are always going to fall. Sure, not this time. Continuing on, she says, yes, the scenario in Haiti was bad. She ignores the analysis that the reason the scenario in Haiti was bad is because the international community tried to interject its will and tried to exploit the Haitian system. Continuing on with the disadvantage. She says cross applies much of what's going on, but she fails to acknowledge that this is unique to furthering the mindset. At the point that we say we need to enter Iran to use their oil and have those natural resources and help the American economy, that is the mindset we're trying to contradict, not at this time. Next up, this example about Iraq. Well, Iraqis could have refused Halliburton. We just bombed Iraq. We have soldiers there. We support the Iraqi Governing Council. At what point does Iraq get to reject what we tell them to do? In the same way, at what point does Iran get to reject our assertion of our oil rights through Conoco? They never give that analysis, not this time. Continuing on. They completely ignore Ian's analysis that our rhetoric tries to hide our exploitation, especially in Iraq. At the point that we're trying to use the international community as a shield to not show the real exploitation that's happening, not only in Iraq, but will uniquely happen in Iran, they don't address this analysis, you're never going to see the kind of support that they say you will. And we have seen this once again, time and time again, in both the Philippines and India, not this time. Continuing on with the Taliban, they said, well, we left the Taliban alone. What they fail to acknowledge is we created the Taliban. We, as the international community, created the Mujahideen, then tried to shut them off and control them. At that point, it's the international community's engagement in another country that uniquely created Al-Qaeda, that uniquely created the Taliban, that uniquely created that oppression. Continuing on, exploitation is wrong. Okay, her big analysis is that we have no analysis, that we don't see this human rights abuses, and we don't see any sort of solution. However, at the point that you provide you clear examples of Sierra Leone, where we do see human rights violations when the international community gets involved, as well as the Taliban example, I'm not seeing where we not have this analysis. We have empirical examples where this has happened. Continuing on. Next on advantage one. They keep on talking about reforming Iran at this time, I'm sorry. Okay. The big analysis is that when we get involved as the international community, we fuel the fire. Basically, what happens in the
status quo. They keep on talking about Iran being the bastion of moderates. What have we seen? A month and a half ago, they held elections in Iran, and the extremists said moderates couldn't run. So what happened? Well, the moderates didn't win because they couldn't run. So right now, if we take this action, we're actually uniquely supporting the extremists that caused this. We're saying, oh, that action a month and a half ago was probably the right decision. Let's go ahead and support that. And I'm going to say that's always going to turn their analysis. Ian?
So we sanctioned Iran for 7 years, and then the hardliners swept the victory in an election. This is what we get by the isolation. This is how we avoid, exploitation.
What I'm saying is you keep talking. This is actually, she spoke on this specifically on Advantage 3, that we see a lot of, Advantage 3, that Katami is taking actions that moderates are actually, making changes in Iran, and we should recognize this. That isn't happening. So if you're saying we should recognize what's going on in Iran, let's recognize the truth, that the extremists are in control. And at the point that you're saying go in and now take advantage of their oil resources, I'm going to say that's even going to feed the extremists and more. Remember, 17 of the 9/11 bombers were from Saudi Arabia, a country that we went in, engaged, and exploited. At that point, I see no reason why that wouldn't occur in Iran as well, not at this time. Continuing on. We don't engage Iran. Okay, fine, we don't engage Iran. No, we have sanctions against them. That's a clear engagement of the international community. I'm saying what should happen is we should remove the sanctions and take our hands off stats. We should let Iran determine itself rather than trying to force their hand into what we want them to do. Advantage 2, they keep on saying that Iran has a choice. At the point that they are actually endorsing the exploitation, and they say this, well, you need to help the United States economy and we should use Conoco as a tool to do that. At that point, I'm going to say turn that analysis and once again, show that Iran will not have a choice under what they're advocating. Iraqi reconstruction. She says our analysis here is that we need to pull out of Iraq. No, the analysis is when the international community gets involved, we destroy things. We prevent Iraq from ever having self-determination, and we never prepare Iraq for us to pull out. We never prepare Iraq to have a stable government on their own. At that point, we are dictatorial and controlling. So, ultimately, what's going to happen? If you buy into the government or the opposition philosophy, we can really see that the international community only fosters oppression and only fosters exploitation. And at that point, you're never going to vote for it.
Thank you, member of the opposition. And the debate now turns to a rebuttal phase. First belongs to the leader of the opposition, Mr. O'Connell. You have the floor.
This debate ultimately comes down to two scenarios that we must weigh. First of all, are the overall implications of having some sort of international community involved in nation-state building. The second, of course, is dealing with Iran specifically and the problems involved within international community building in Iran. Let's deal with the first. Let's go to the opposition philosophy. What you realize here is that when Marie tries to turn this analysis, it only feeds our point that the problem with exploitation is the fact that we use the international community to take resources from other countries. And then in addition, as Kate tells you, the problem was additionally the sanctions, which were a form of the international community trying to control a government and trying to raise a nation state. This is the analysis that I gave you before with self-determination. Realize that under self-determination, at the level where we enter into any nation and try to shape their government through sanctions or external apparatus through the international community, we prevent them from ever self-actualizing as an identity or as a culture. Marie doesn't respond to this, nor Marie at no time responds to this analysis. She never gives you any ability for the Iranians or any other government for that matter to actually self-identify, to gain control of their culture. At that level, what we see is that the exploitation comes from the international community denying them this fundamental condition for nation-state building. Furthermore, I want you to hold through the analysis that Kate was here. The government advocacy holds them to their contract, and then additionally leads to the exploitation by France and Russia within Iran, this means that they'll never get that knowledge of self-sufficiency that I talked about that they don't respond to. Additionally, pull through that analysis, the biggest problem is that once we take our sanctions off of Iran, we don't allow them to be self-sufficient. We don't allow them to build up their economy because as an international community, we've exploited them for too long. We're telling you that our advocacy from the beginning is to not get the international community involved with nation-state building, and that includes Iran before now. That's the analysis that we give you from the beginning, and that's the analysis that we're looking to pull through. As far as Iran being experienced with oil, Kate does an excellent job here where she tells you the point that going into countries is a harmful business, and that furthermore, as far as the oil interests are concerned, we've created a vacuum for exploitation. Now you can go down to the subpoint C, you can see the implications of this. Realize that when the community is horrible at turning over power, we can never actually create a nation state. All she says is that she agrees with Katie that that's not a good situation. But pull through the fact that we don't help them with big issues like security, and that additionally we don't take political actions except for our personal interests. Pull through the fact of the mess that we left in Afghanistan, and realize that this overall position tells you that in general, it's a bad idea for the international community to get involved. Yes, sanctions are bad, but allowing the international community to decide how a nation state should be built, allow those sanctions to be implemented, and furthermore, allow that detriment and that exploitation. The next place where you vote for Colorado College is on the disadvantage. Pull through the fact that the arguments we make here are unique to the mindset that we can actually save southern countries so that we can set up nations. What I want you to pull through here that is huge is the term that I placed that we're hiding the exploitation by saying that we're lifting sanctions to help Iran. Pull through the fact that this is going to deter any sort of human rights advancements within Iran, and that additionally it's going to prevent us from ever developing a nation state or allowing them to self-actualize. I want you to pull through the fact that we created the Taliban through international community involvement, and that has prevented a nation state from existing. Pull through the examples of Sierra Leone and Liberia, where I tell you that the major problem with these nations is that the international body got too involved, and that additionally, because of that, they never self-actualized and they never self-determined. Then with the exploitation, realize that the analysis comes from the examples of Sierra Leone and Liberia, where we see these human rights abuses, and we see the violence from the lack of a nation state due to the fact that we don't allow nations to be self-sufficient or to self-determine, to self-actualize. Then we get onto the Iran debate. Realize that you're going to be voting for the Colorado College here on the turn that we tell you that we're giving more power now to the hardliners and telling them that they're doing a good job. And pull through the analysis that I give you, the progressives would have won a long time ago had we never been involved. And then additionally, the only way to get that nation state was to allow them to self-actualize. On the economy, realize that we're only going to endorse exploitation by France and Russia, and with Iraq, realize that that analysis is proving why our involvement is harmful in the first place. You vote for the Colorado College.
The opposition, the final rebuttal belongs to the Prime Minister. Mr. Samuel, you have the floor.
What the opposition case amounts to is a long list of things we've done wrong in the past, which tells you nothing about doing something right now. Fundamentally, there are too many concessions, too much offense on their off-case positions to you have any chance for voting for them. The best chance they've got is this sort of new advocacy where we drop sanctions but never trade, and I have some serious issues with that. Let's go to the opposition philosophy. Remember, you're weighing this as a net benefits policymaker, up or down on the plan. You're not deciding whether or not, in all those other cases, that was a good idea. We are asking you to decide whether this example of international community involvement is good. There we go. On the opposition philosophy, it tells us we advocate no sanctions too, but then the international community just doesn't get involved. My first response is, this is new, so perm, due to their counter-advocacy. But you wouldn't want to, because dropping sanctions and not trading isn't really a very good idea. Our advocacy is that to make dropping sanctions meaningful, you've actually got to go and then trade with those nations. Consider dropping, I have no idea where this is completely vague. I think it's new in the MO, don't vote on it. They can't just advocate like all the good parts of the plan and then just avoid their philosophy or whatever it is. I want you to extend reason number one. It's not unique to us. We don't deny self-determination. I want you to extend to number two, that there are no impacts to self-determination. We terminally impact things on case. Case doesn't answer any of that. Now, they say that they can get out of all the self-determination terms because they don't have sanctions too. But you're remembering the reason number 5, I believe it is. It's that it's actually worse. They hurt self-determination because they assume that Iran is this child that the U.S. must protect. That they're just totally incapable of handling their their own oil interests. They drop this offense, which means to vote for them and this philosophy would be essentially infantilizing, because they never answer back this turn. We think Iran is made up of grown-ups, and they can handle their trade relationships. I want to extend for number 6, that's another term, that we increase the quality of life with more money so there's more self-determination. Even if you bought their new counter-advocacy where we drop sanctions and never trade, they don't get that turn, so they never increase personal income, and that's another reason to vote for the government because we're actually doing something. They say that we're going to hold them to this abusive Conoco contract, and that's how we're going to exploit them. No, we aren't. Nothing planned that we're going to hold them to this Conoco contract. Second, even if we did, Iran wanted that contract. The United States didn't. Iran wanted Conoco to come in and develop their oil fields. If that's exploitation, then I wish people would exploit me more often. In fact, we do not exploit the opposition team if I voted for them. Now, they say aid is bad because the international community imposed its will. That's a bad example of international community. This is a good example. On the northern exploitation of the south. They say the mindset, we're masking the rhetoric of exploitation. Yeah, we're masking it so well that I have no idea how we're exploiting them at all. Our argument is that our mindset in this case is good. It's one of self-determination. When we say to Iran, you're grown-ups, you can handle your contracts. If you wish to trade with us, you may. If you don't wish to, well, there's nothing we can do about it. They say that how are they going to reject us? How will Iran deny us? Well, they can just say, not accept the oil contracts, since we're not going to war with them, we're forcing our will on them. We tell you, they say that we created the Taliban, and then we ignored the Taliban, and they got worse. But again, this has nothing to do with the Republic of Iran and whether we should sanction them. I want you to send the answer on the bottom. This is totally non-unique. If the North exploits the South, it does so either way. At least now we have a good trade relationship. On the case. Remember, the best chance we maybe ever have of winning is that the opposition philosophy somehow outweigh our impacts, but our impacts are more specific, they're more likely to occur, and they don't have conceded offense on them. Let's go to vantage point. They say essentially that we're going to fuel the fire because we're supporting the extremists, but we had sanctions and then the hardliners were put in power. It seems that we dropped the sanctions, that's not to support them because we're taking out their platform. Moreover, the fact that the hardliners had to cheat to win that election proves our analysis that the Iranians are moderate and we should be trading with them. They never answer to that. Then they say 9/11, never forget. Well, I have no idea what that has to do with Iran. Okay, the Saudis maybe aren't a good trading partner. Iran sure is. Extend our implications covering the critical obligation to support reform, and then go to advantage 2. They say we get worse exploitation because Russia and France are going to exploit them. No, they aren't. If they trade with Iran, it's because Iran says okay, and if they don't, it's because Iran says no. Let Iran make their own choices. They're the only ones that want to make those decisions for them. Moreover, advantage 2 isn't about Iran. It's about the United States and jobs for American workers. Extend that. It's completely conceded, and it's most ethical to help the most needy. On advantage 3, they say that we're going to destroy stuff. But the alternative is the United States acting alone. They concede that if we drop sanctions, we could have international support to rebuild Iraq and fix an example of international exploitation. There is no way to vote except to drop sanctions for the government's